So we're starting a series, and so for the next, probably through the end of November, we're going to talk about mission and the different aspects of mission. What we're here for as people, what we're here for as Christians, what we're here for as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, why we're here in East Lexington, and the different perspectives that each of us have about mission and what our goals are. So I hope to introduce that today a little bit, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite stories, and that is, it's our focus verse, and that's in 2 Kings 6, and I picked out one of the verses, let's see, that I especially liked. 2 Kings 6, I think I picked out 17, isn't that right? 17 and 18. Yeah. And Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, and Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray, open his eyes, that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw. And behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. And so this has always been one of my favorite stories. And I got to read it this week and study it, and I learned some new things about it that I really wasn't expecting. So I'm happy that I get to share that with you today. So let's say just a word of prayer before we get started. Lord, I thank you so much for being with me this week and for your protection, for your guidance. Lord, for your Holy Spirit that leads us into your word as we study it, that you are just there. And I pray, Father, that you would be with the thoughts that I present this morning, Lord, that they might be presented clearly, and that you might be with the hearers, Lord, that they might hear what you have to say today. In your name I pray, amen. Amen. So, who has been involved ever in a practical joke, or getting somebody, foiling them? Lots of people. So there's two kinds of practical jokes, right? There's a kind-spirited, we're all going to laugh together at the end of this and have fun kind of practical joke. And then there's the kind of mean-spirited practical joke that you're just going to get this person and we're just going to get them. Okay, so practical jokes in their core are this. They're there to surprise a person. You put them in a different situation where they're not expecting something to happen, and then something happens that is just totally surprise, out of context to them. So I was trying to think of something, a story that sort of symbolizes this, or is an example of it. And who remembers a movie from the, I think, mid-90s called Mrs. Doubtfire? Yeah, most everybody remembers that. So you remember, so it's Robin Williams is the main character, and for you, those of you that don't know, he wants to be with his children because through a settlement of divorce, he can't be with his children by law. And so he decides, he gets this plan, and he dresses up like an older female who is going to be the nanny, really, for his kids. And so he goes and he interviews and he gets the job. His wife unknowingly hires him. And so he goes through all of this activities and these things that happen where he's in this house and he's playing with his kids, but they don't know it's him. And he's interacting with his wife. She doesn't know it's him. His wife has a boyfriend. It gets kind of awkward. And so they get to this point where the wife, they get so close that they invite Mrs. Doubtfire to go to dinner with them. And so, yes, right? So they come to this dinner, and they're all there, and the boyfriend is Pierce Brosnan, one of Dion's favorite characters ever. And so Robin Williams does not like that Pierce's character so much that he wants to get him. And so he goes into the back, and he finds the food that's going to get served to Pierce Brosnan. And he takes hot pepper, and he covers it with hot pepper, right? You remember this? And so then he goes away, and the food gets delivered to Pierce, and he starts to eat, and he takes one bite, and he's like, and he can't breathe. And all of a sudden, this came to me for multiple reasons, but somebody has to do the Heimlich maneuver on Pierce Brosnan, right? And so, because he's going to die. And so they do the Heimlich, and oh, thanks, I appreciate it, you saved me. And so, but the joke was on Pierce because they put all this hot pepper on. So yeah, so I thought of this for a couple of reasons. One is the Heimlich maneuver, so I thought that was apropos. The other was the hot peppers, because I thought if Elizabeth was eating this food, she would have just continued on to eat, and she would have asked for more. Can I please have more hot pepper? Because this isn't quite hot enough for me. So, but practical jokes. So, at their heart, they are things that are in different situations. So this story in 2 Kings shows us something about vision and perspective and awareness and self-awareness. And those are the words, I think, that go with this story that help us to understand it a little bit more. So if you've got your Bibles, turn to 2 Kings 6, and it's 8 through 23. And those really the section of this. And we're going to tell the story just a little bit. And this is the time of Israel's history where Israel really is split. It's after Solomon, and the kingdom of Israel is split into the northern kingdom, into the southern kingdom of Judah. So you have the 10 tribes that were in the north, and Judah in the south. And really, these were the kings that were leading Israel into apostasy. Judah had a few good kings that would sort of bring back that they were going to follow God, but most of them were leading them toward into apostasy and actually getting them near to having them be taken into captivity into Babylon, where the Lord was trying to wake them up. During this particular time, Syria and Israel were basically in a constant state of war. They would be either in open war, or there would be these sort of border conflicts, these raids that would happen. And at this particular time, King Ahab had died, and so the Syrian army had pushed into Israel territory a little bit, and they were doing these raids. And so this particular story is about that time. And we see God's providence at work here. So the king of Syria would plan a raid that he was going to go and attack a certain city, and then the Lord would speak to Elisha. And he would tell Elisha where the raid was going to happen. And so then Elisha would go and tell the king. And the king would send soldiers to foil the attack that was going to happen. And so this happened over and over again. And the verse says in 2 Kings, then the king of Israel sent someone to the place of which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him. He was watchful there, and not just once or twice. So it happened over and over again. In fact, the king of Syria, it happened so often that he said, hey, look, somebody is in my camp who's really for Israel. And he says, in the verse, it says, will you not show me which of us is for the king of Israel? So he suspected that he had a traitor in his camp. And he said, who was it? We want to get this person. And his servants came to him, and in verse 12 it says, none, my lord, O king, but Elisha the prophet, who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So God came, and they realized that it was Elisha that was doing this. And Elisha had this special connection with God. The things that you say secretly, in private, these very things Elisha knows. And then he goes and he foils your plans. And this was not the days of computers and phones where you could copy and paste messages and then send it. This was probably a time where they might not even write things down. They probably would tell somebody and send it by messenger to the other king. So it took a long time for this to happen. So the Syrian king and his advisors knew this was a God thing, that this was actually God working in this way. They knew that they called Elisha the prophet, actually. So they knew that God was speaking to Elisha. But they didn't necessarily interpret what was happening there in the correct way, right? Because they thought they could still defeat what was happening. Even though it was God that was doing this, they thought they could go and they could capture Elisha and defeat what was happening. So that's what they said. They said, let's go get Elisha, and this will make this not happen, and then we can fight against Israel in a better way. And so they decided they got a bunch of soldiers together, and they went to Dothan, where Elisha was, and they surrounded the city. And Dothan is such a town that you can do that in the middle of the night. So they showed up. There was no soldiers there one night. They go to bed. The next night they wake up. The entire city was surrounded with soldiers. And So the servant, Elisha's servant, gets up and he walks outside and he's doing his morning thing and he looks around and he sees all these soldiers. And he says in verse 15, "And when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, 'Alas, my master, what shall we do?'" So the servant is terrified, right? So he realizes that they're in trouble. Elisha's been doing all these things to foil all these plans, but now they've come to get Elisha and to get him. He's worried about himself. And these guys are there to get him. The end is near. So what does Elisha say next? The New Living Translation says, "Fear not." That's what he says. So that's a phrase that we hear a lot in Scripture, right? Fear not. In fact, I looked up a bunch of places where you hear it. You see it in Luke 12:7. You see it in Haggai 2:5. In Joshua, where Joshua is giving a speech to the Israelites about an attack that they're going to have to go do. And he says, "Fear not." We hear it when the disciples are in the boat and the storm comes. And Jesus calms the storm. And then Jesus asks them, it's like, "Why were you afraid? I was here the whole time." He says, "Fear not." And why does he do that? Because God is love, right? That's a definition that we see. And perfect love casts out all fear. God was there, so why be afraid? God was there. We know he was there. But the servant didn't get that. He didn't understand that God was still there. We didn't have to be afraid. So, why was Elisha not afraid? Did he have some special connection or did he have to exhibit some faith there as well? So this was the same Elisha that had been giving these messages from God about where the Syrian army was going to be. And so he would send these messages and it would save that particular place. But then no message here. He didn't get a message that said, "Hey, the Syrian army is going to surround you here." He just showed up one morning and there they were. So why wasn't Elisha afraid at all of those people? Well, Elisha knew that he'd been helped. The God that had helped him before with those other messages was going to help him in this time too. And so he said, "You know what? I know God is here. I know that he's going to protect us." So he said, "God, would you please show my friend, my servant, that you're here?" And here's all these angels that appeared. And he looks around and he sees more angels than were their soldiers, and that they were protecting him. And it soothed his servant to where he knew that God is with us. So what happens next in this story? Let's move on from that. The soldiers come because they see Elisha. They don't see the angels, but they come and they talk to Elisha, and Elisha prays to God. He says, "Please strike these people blind, strike these soldiers blind so they can't see." And then they lead these soldiers off to Samaria. So Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom. So they take them basically to all where their enemies are. And when he gets there, these Syrian soldiers are then surrounded by their enemies. And Elisha prays again, "Open their eyes so they can see where they're at." So all of this, what word do we see in this a lot? It's about vision, right? It's one of my favorite words. We're going to talk about vision because he mentions it like 3 times. So you would think that these soldiers were going to be terrified at this moment, right? The Syrian soldiers, because they're surrounded by all the Israelites, and I'm sure that they were. So what's the vision part of this story that we've seen so far? So number 1. When Elisha's servant isn't able to see that there's angels there that are protecting him, Elisha asks God, "Please open their eyes. Please open his eyes so that he can see these angels." So that's one part of vision. The second part of vision is he prays that the Syrian soldiers will be blinded. And so they won't be able to see. And so then he walks them to Samaria, and then he asks for their eyes to be opened so that they can see. Well, so I have one question here. How were they able to walk if they were blinded? So does that mean that they're totally blind? Or maybe they just don't understand. Maybe he used confusion here rather than completely blinded. So there's some history with that, right? We think back to Gideon in that story where there's 300 soldiers Israelite soldiers that were surrounding 100,000 Syrian soldiers in that case. And God confused the army of the Syrians, and they started attacking each other, and then they ran away. So there was a case where they used confusion, not necessarily absolute blindness. So maybe it was just that they were confused and they didn't know what was going on, so Elisha was able to lead them to that city. So maybe it was more that. So maybe it's not just absolute vision that this is about. Maybe it's more about understanding. Maybe it was the fact that the servant didn't really understand what was going on. He was in this situation where he really was a person of God. He was an Israelite. He was one of the promised people. He should have known that God was actually there and was going to keep his promise, and he would have protected him. But he was just as scared. He was scared that God wasn't there, and that they were going to be in trouble and they were going to be killed. So maybe that's the opening of the eyes that we need to see. It wasn't necessarily actually vision. It was just the servant being able to understand things a bit more. What about the Syrian soldiers? Maybe that there was, they didn't know the situation that they were in. Maybe they thought that they were in power, they were in control, and then Elisha confuses them. They go to Samaria, and they wake up, and they're back to their senses, but they realize, oh, we're surrounded, we're in trouble. They didn't realize the situation that they were in until they were woken up. So I think that, let's see. So the idea that of vision and understanding sort of goes together. And sometimes it's actual physical sight that we need to be able to see. Sometimes it's just the situation that we need to be able to see. And this story sort of tells us, we get a glimpse of the idea of this battle between good and evil. And there's a physical realm that this battle is taking place in. And then there's a higher level battle, a spiritual battle, that we can sort of glimpse in, where Elisha keys in his servant to be able to see into this battle, into this situation where God is inserting himself into this physical idea. So we're able to see that this battle between good and evil. We see that sometimes in our lives, right? This idea that God, we have these physical things that happen. We have physical needs. We have to go to work. We have to go to school. We have to be able to function in this. But then God sort of can make things happen in the spiritual realm. When we study, we depend on Him. But they also get transcribed into our physical ideas. So sometimes it happens where things happen where God protects us, and you're wondering, why did He do that for me? So I thought of two ideas that, something that happened to me. So you guys know that I was in this accident about a year ago. And so I got hit by this truck, and the next car over, a lady was also hit. I survived, and she did not survive. Why does that happen? Why does one person survive and the other person doesn't? So we get these stories where bad things happen to good people. And we often ask that question, why that happens. And I've been having this running conversation with a group of guys about that and where they think evil comes from. These are big questions that we try to solve. Did God create evil because He created Satan? This is a question that sometimes people ask. We get glimpses of this there's certain texts that we can read about in Ezekiel 28, where we see where God created Lucifer, and he was this covering cherub. And then somewhere along the line, he decided that he didn't want to follow God anymore, and he didn't trust his government, and he got selfishness in his heart, and he fell. That's in Ezekiel 28:12. And then you read similar stories in Isaiah 14. And we get a glimpse of that in Job as well, where the rulers from all over the universe come together and they meet, and Satan is representing earth. And so they're having this conversation back and forth. And so, and the really one that I want to look at that gives us this idea of where evil came from is in Matthew 13. If you'll turn there, Matthew 13:23. And this is the parable of the wheat and the tares. Another parable he put forth to them, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seeds in his field. But while men slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain sprouted and produced a crop, then the tares also appeared. So the servants of the owner came and said to him, 'Sir, did you not sow good seeds in your field? How then does it have tares?' He said to them, 'An enemy has done this.' The servant said to him, 'Do you want us to go and gather them up?' But he said, 'No, lest while you gather up the tares, you also uproot the wheat with them.'" So the owner didn't plant the tares, an enemy came and planted the tares. That tells us that, was God the author of evil? No, not yet. No, this is where an enemy came and he did this. And he was the one. So God wasn't responsible for these tares that were there. And we see this throughout all of these texts that we read about, that God really isn't the author of evil. Satan is the one that's responsible. And yet God doesn't deal with that until the end. And so sometimes that shows us that there's these bad things that can happen to us throughout this life. And our understanding of our situation is really important. Because if we have a correct understanding of what's happening, if we can step back and see the perspective that there is a battle, there's a battle of good and evil, this concept of the great controversy, it helps us deal with this when these bad things happen to good people. So our situation and how we perceive our situation is really important in this. So when I moved when I was in college, finished high school and moved from Denver to Lincoln for college, my perspective changed and my situation changed. When I was in high school, I viewed myself and my identity was as an athlete. And so I didn't really view myself as that good at school. I did okay, and I wasn't really a social person, but I thought I was a pretty good athlete. And so I was always tried out for all of the sports. I tried out for football and for basketball and for baseball, and I loved to play all of these things. And I thought it was really important to be able to make the varsity team and to start, and whether we would win the games or not. So that was what I identified as an athlete. And so I could imagine myself being John Elway playing football, or I could imagine myself being Michael Jordan on a basketball court. Just had a lot of fun with that. And so when I started college, I thought it would be the same way, and that I would show up there at college and be able to continue playing sports and doing all of those things. Well, what I didn't really realize, the situation that I was in, was I was in this school where there was 90 kids. And not 90 kids in a class, entire school. So if you separate that out, then you suddenly have 25 kids, or 20 or 25 kids in a class. And if you spread it out even more, then you have probably 12 or 13 guys in a given class. So that means that there's only about 40 kids, 40 boys in this entire school. So that's what I viewed myself as an athlete in. So, and so when I would show up to play basketball, I was actually one of the tallest guards there. And guards is where there's the shorter people that play that position. But if you can imagine that, I was one of the tallest ones. Well, that's really not, right? It's because I'm not that tall, right? You know that. So I decided that I would try out for the basketball team at college when I showed up. So I showed up to the tryout. And as I looked around the room, I realized that quickly that I was one of the shortest guys in the room. And so I said, well, this is going to be different, but this is okay. It's going to be all right. And so we split up teams and we started scrimmaging. And we scrimmaged for about half an hour. And I soon discovered that as I shot the ball, that probably about 5 times in a row it happened where my shot got blocked and sent back at me quickly. And I said, oh, this is different. This is different than high school. And so we took a break, and I thought about it for a while. I said, well, I'll show them my passing skills and what I can do passing the basketball. So we went back out, and we started. And I started passing the basketball, and I would pass, and it would get stolen, and they would go back down, and they would score a hoop on the other end. And that happened several times in a row. But I didn't give up, because I thought I can still do this. And so I said, I'm going to show them my patented no-look pass. So I said, the next opportunity I get. So I got the ball in the defensive end, and we started running down the court. And we were on a fast break, and I was in the middle, and I had the ball. There was 2 guys on either side of me. There was 2 defenders. So we were at a 3-on-2 fast break. And so I was coming down. I said, oh, this is perfect. I've got it. And so I looked to my right, and I said, okay, it's going to be good. I'm going to look to my right, and I'm going to pass to my left. So I looked this way, and I threw the ball that way. And I could hear the gasps on the audience, and all the guys on the side of the court. I could say, oh, this is good. This is a perfect pass. And so I took a minute, and then I looked back to see where the ball went, because I expected to see the guy going up for a layup. And actually, I had thrown the ball probably about 10 feet over my teammate's head. And in fact, it hit the window up on the ceiling. That's how bad the pass was. It did not hit my target at all. And so those gasps started turning to snickers and to laughs. And the whole gym, probably about 50 guys in there, were snickering and laughing. Oh, I was heartbroken. I was like, oh no. And then it got worse. We tried to run back to play defense, and I hear this loud voice of the coach in this southern drawl, perfect southern drawl. And he said, son, let's just try to get the ball to our teammates before we go all Magic Johnson on people. I was like, ouch. Oh, that hurt. You know? So I realized at that moment that my situation in high school was way different than my situation in college. And that I was going to have to make some adjustments to survive in this situation. And so I did. I started working hard. I started practicing hard. I would show up at the gym early to shoot. And, you know, so there's still pain involved in that situation? Yeah, because I didn't make the varsity team. I made the junior varsity team. And did I start? I didn't get to start. I actually had to come off the bench. But I worked really hard. And I learned a lot about myself that year. That you aren't given things. You have to earn things. And you have to work to enable those things to happen. And I learned a lot about personalities and about how to work with people. And I had to do some introspection to figure out what were my strengths and what were my weaknesses. What was I good at? What was I not good at? What did I need to work on? And so I had to learn how to be a leader and how I could further the team and how do I need to work with people. And so I think that introspection and understanding the situation that you're in are really important skills. And evaluating a situation that you're in and how to evaluate how people respond to you is really important. And it serves you well in all different areas of life. And sometimes when we evaluate these situations, that's what was happening here in the Bible. These people were evaluating the situations not correctly. The servant did not know that God was there and that God was in control of the situation. He didn't realize that. The king of Syria didn't realize that God was in control of the situation and that God could actually do miracles. He went immediately to the fact that, oh, there's a traitor in our midst, and that's how this is happening. He didn't realize that God would give these special messages to Elisha to be able to overcome their plans and their goals. The Syrian army that got taken captive, they were in this situation where they didn't know how they got there because they were so confused, and so they were scared. The Israelite king, we didn't even go to that part of the story yet. The Israelite king, what did he want to do at the end of 2 Kings story, or at the end of 2 Kings 6. He says, start in verse 20. So it was, when they had come to Samaria, that Elisha said, Lord, open the eyes of these men, that they may see. And the Lord opened their eyes, and they saw. And there they were, inside Samaria. Now when the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, my father, shall I kill them? Shall I kill them? He said it twice. He was actually kind of giddy, excited. Let's kill these guys. In the King James Version, it says smite them. What a great word, right? Smite. I'm not even sure what that means. Apparently it means kill. But the king of Israel wants to smite these people. So he really didn't understand the situation, because what happens in the next verse? And Elisha, how does he say? But Elisha, he answered, you shall not kill them. Would you kill those whom you have taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set food and water before them, that they may eat and drink and go to their master. Then he prepared a great feast for them, and after that they ate and drank. He sent them away, and they went to their master. So the band of Syrian raiders came no more into the land of Israel. So the Israelite king wanted to kill these people. Elisha said no. God said no. No, we're not going to kill them. And in fact, what did they do? You really usually don't feed your prisoners, right? You usually either kill them, you put them in jail, you make them your servants. You certainly don't feed them and then send them back to your master. That was an unusual response, right? So the Israelite king didn't understand that either. And so he didn't understand the situation that he was in and what God was really trying to do. I think you can actually put each of these characters and sort of compare them to sort of our walk in Christianity today, right? So you have the king of Syria who doesn't believe in God, he's a non-believer, and yet God reaches down and affects his life with these miracles, trying to turn him. You have the servant who is a person of God, he's one of God's chosen people, he's an Israelite, but he doesn't know that God's presence is there. So that could be one of us as Christians who goes through life and we're working really hard, we're trying to overcome, we're just trying to live our best life. We're doing our job, we're going to school, and yet we come up to troubles and we don't realize that God's in control and God can produce angels right there among us and lead us and help us in life. And then you have these more unbelievers, the Syrian army. They don't know what's going on because they just show up at this trying to do their job to take Elisha captive, but no, they end up in the middle of this in Samaria, and then they're captives. What's that all about? They don't even know what's going on. And then you have the king of Israel who says, oh, let's kill these other guys because now we have power over them. He's like the very black and white guy. These are our enemies. Let's kill them. We're right, they're wrong. Let's just get rid of them because they're the enemy. But God says, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to feed them. And so the situation has changed. And so there's another verse that, that you may have heard that does the same thing, that says the same thing that God said to the Israelites of what he wanted to do. It's Matthew 5:43 and 48. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore you shall be perfect, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So we can find ourselves in these different situations where God is working and in different ways, and we just don't get it. And I wanted to talk about mission, and I haven't really, I asked myself, what does this have to do with mission? What does this have, all of these things and these different characters, and they don't understand what's going on, what does that have to do with mission? Well, you know what? None of them realized what God's mission was. God's mission in this whole thing was to bring these unbelievers to a closer walk with him. And so at the end of the day, they fed them. They didn't feed them a little, they fed them a lot. And then the raiders didn't come into Israel anymore. When God showed compassion on these people, they stopped being so antagonistic. God brought peace to that land, even just for a little bit, by this compassionate, benevolent act of feeding them. And so that's what God's mission is on earth now, too, right? He wants us to go to unbelievers and present him and his true character and be benevolent toward them, and he brings peace. And that's what he does. And then I think that's what the new part of this story was that I learned, was that God's mission wasn't necessarily just showing the angels, show his mighty power. No, he used that to be able to show compassion, to bring peace to this land, and show the Syrians who he really was.